Today we're going to be using our black and white charcoal pencils. Now technically there's no such thing as white charcoal. A white charcoal pencil is it's called charcoal white, but it's actually a high quality of chalk. And then of course we have our black charcoal pencil, and you'll also need your kneaded eraser. A kneaded eraser, you will be very happy to know, erases charcoal very well, lifts it off the page, so that makes this a very user-friendly medium. We're also going to be working on our toned paper, and this can take a lot of different forms. I'm using a gray Canson charcoal paper. It's very lightweight, it's very inexpensive, it has a very nice surface. If you are using charcoal paper, look very carefully at it. Most, or not most, but many charcoal papers have two different textures on each side. They have a more textured side and a smoother side. We want to use the smoother of the two sides. Now it's no big problem if you end up using the highly textured side. You will just have a lot more visible texture beneath your drawing, and that's perfectly fine. But if you can determine the smoother of the two sides, that's the one you want to aim for. Sometimes you can do it visually. With this paper, it has sort of a grid appearance on it that you can see fairly clearly in good light, but you can't always tell that way. So another way to check is to take just the pads of your fingers and run them very lightly over the surface of the paper on both sides. The rougher side will sort of snag and catch at your fingertips, and the smoother side not so much. So that's a good way also. But as I said, it's not critically important. Now, if you don't have charcoal paper or pastel paper in either gray, blue, or some shade of buff or brown, then you can substitute other things that you might have, and you actually can do a very nice drawing on brown craft paper, or a brown paper sack actually makes a really nice drawing. Drawing material has really nice texture. So you don't have to have special paper, but if you do, that is marvelous. The one I'm using today is gray. One of the wonderful things, if you've never used toned paper and a black and white on a colored paper before, you very quickly discover it's really easy to get a nice rich shaded look, and that's because the paper is doing about 50% of your work. The paper is providing all the mid-range values, all those warm middle values that can be so complex, and also it's very fast to work in charcoal on toned paper because you have a lot less shading to contend with. A good way to get acquainted with your pencils is to make a little value scale, and simply, just as with pencil, to get a brighter white, you use more pressure and linger longer, lifting, lighter pressure, less and less as it fades until it fades completely into the soft gray of our paper. Likewise with black, the same process. Now when you're going to have something that is dark on one side and light on the other, and we'll have some feathers and some forms in our drawing today that will fit this category, you have two choices. The first is to fade your light color into the paper and then fade the black from the opposite direction so that that middle is exposed paper, which makes a wonderful mid color, kind of a nice transition. Or you can actually put down a layer of white, a layer of black, and actually blend them much as you would blend paint. I recommend, if possible, using the first technique, reserving the paper. And it's okay if you get a little too heavy-handed and you have to come back in and blend. But if you actually blend the white over the black, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but it flattens it out quite a bit. You lose the beautiful texture and the texture beneath your drawing in charcoal drawing is a wonderful part of the drawing itself. So I try very hard to keep the drawing from becoming overworked. The other thing that happens here is as you flatten out by putting all this charcoal on top of each other, you get to a point where you sort of get saturated, where it doesn't really shade very well, and you may end up with something that you don't like. Now, the exception to this is when you have something, and we very likely will not have this case, but if you have something that has to be shaded that is very smooth, I think of mechanical things, metallic things. If you were drawing a shiny car or something like that, where you really did want the texture to be very uniform and sort of mechanical, then this could work well. But for our owls, we're going to try to stick to using our exposed paper for the middle values, and you can see the beautiful textures that are preserved when you do it this way. We're going to warm up by, and also warm up our eyes as well as our hands by drawing just an ordinary white egg, the type that you might have in your refrigerator, the type that you might have from the grocery store. And what I suggest you do is that you set your egg on a sheet of white paper, and that you put perhaps your drawing lamp or a flashlight on one side of it, or set the egg on the windowsill. At any rate, what you want is a strong light source from one direction. When we use black and white charcoal on a predominantly light colored subject, such as a snowy owl, an Arctic owl, any of the lighter colored owls, even a barred owl, which is pretty much 50-50 but has a lot of patterns and stripes, you want to do your initial drawing with the white. It's very, very easy to put black over white. It doesn't work so well when you're trying to put white over black. In fact, you'll never regain the pristine white. So you want to start out with white and do about the first half of the drawing process simply with white before we add any black at all. So we're going to use our white. You want to have a good sharp point. Your pencil sharpener, depending on what type you have, may or may not handle charcoal well. If it doesn't, charcoal can be sharpened a number of ways. You can use an X-Acto blade or a penknife. You also can use just a sheet of sandpaper and scrub the charcoal pencil on it. But a good heavy-duty pencil sharpener will sharpen a charcoal pencil. If it seems to clog, the way to clear it is easy. Just get an ordinary school pencil and using a pretty firm pressure, go ahead and sharpen the school pencil down an inch or so, and it will clear the blades of all the charcoal. So, all right then, so I'm putting in a rough sketch of an egg. Now you don't have to worry about being precise, because when we're ready to clean it up, our kneaded eraser cleans up the white charcoal very, very nicely. So I'm going to go ahead, for our purposes, we'll assign a light source from this direction. Your light source may come from somewhere else. Generally speaking, on a curved surface, the shadows also have a curved nature. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in. Now, even though we're not using the gentle pencil technique, it's a good habit to use a rounded stroke. Anytime you're using any kind of medium, drawing medium that has to be blended, that rounded stroke with a little curve at the end is going to serve you well. It's going to make a little more harmonious blend. One thing you'll notice right away is you do generate some crumbs and some dust. You do not want to brush them, which will actually drag them across the paper and leave a mark. If you have a very high quality drafting brush, you may, like this, you may be able to get away with it, but I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to just blow them away before I continue. Okay. One interesting thing when you have your egg on a white surface is, while you do have the primary light source coming down from above, there's also light reflected back up from the bottom of the egg. And while you might assume if you hadn't really looked closely, you might assume that the brightest part would be here, darkest part would be on that edge. It's not true because of the reflected light. The darkest shadow on your egg, if you look carefully, is going to be a band of shadow that runs just inside that reflected light. So go ahead, put some reflected light here from our resting place of our egg. All we're doing here is just becoming familiar with the white charcoal before we begin to work on our owls. You have a printable that talks about this very process, shading the egg. And if you don't have an egg handy, you can do this exercise just based on the printable itself. Okay, just as with pencil, the values that we get from the charcoal pencil come from blocking out more and more or less and less of the paper underneath. So where it's solid white, we've completely obliterated any view of the paper. Alrighty. Okay, we have our egg there. Alright, now I'm going to grab my kneaded eraser, clean up the edges around my egg, and then I'm going to add a little bit of black. Just as with paint, if you are a painter, black is extremely potent and tends to flatten everything out and must be used very thoughtfully in order to be effective. Now that same potent, rich dark pigment also gives you a lot of potential for beautiful drawing, but you need to be careful how you use it. So what you don't want to do is come in here and just start happily drawing all over the top of your right. No, it's going to take very little black. In fact, if you're looking at your egg, there's no actual black on the egg at all. It's just shades of this sort of white and off-white. So what you want to do is you want to add just the merest little bit of black. Not much at all. Just to deepen, that shaded area. Okay. Look carefully at where the shadow is the darkest. It won't be uniform. It will be wider at one point, narrower at another point. Okay, if you need to come back, soften the edges a bit so that not too much of an outline here, you can do that. All right. And if you want to put a shadow beneath your egg, then black is the perfect tool for that. Okay. All right then. So go ahead and try your hand at shading a white egg. If you find that the black and white contrast is too hard. Of course, the egg is relatively smooth, and if you wanted to soften that just a bit, you can do that.